Welcome to our discussion here. We are joined in the second half of the program by Mr. Colin Coleman, CEO of Goldman Sachs Sub-Saharan Africa, to talk about the upcoming South African elections. Welcome to our dialogue. Who will be the winners?
Well, I think historically the African National Congress, the ruling party, has achieved between 62 and 67% in the last 25 years. So I don't think there's really a debate about whether they will be victorious, but time will tell. It's a question of what the mandate is and the degree of victory that President Ramaphosa enjoys, and with it, what kind of confidence and political capital he has to use to appoint a strong administration to get structural reforms and modernization of the economy going.
Modernization of the economy, and particularly land reform and land redisposal, will be critical issues on the agenda of the ruling ANC. But what do you think are the other issues that are likely to divide the spectrum in the South African Congress?
Well, effectively, the most important single structural problem is the lack of growth in the economy, together with the very high levels of unemployment. We have about 9 million unemployed in South Africa out of a population of 55 million. So the narrow definition is 27% unemployment, one of the highest in the world. That is also still racially skewed towards the African population. So we have a dual problem of how do we drive growth and create jobs in the economy. In the last 25 years, we have tracked around just under 3% growth rates, with a population growth of 1.5%. So we need to get our growth, which is now in the last few years been more like 1.5%, back to the normative 3%. And the critical issue here is developing the institutional capacity of the state, making sure the state administration is strong, taking failing state-owned enterprises and putting them to work for the people of South Africa, and getting bang for our buck from our significant public spending that is taking place. It's about a $400 billion GDP, so the largest in Africa, but and the most sophisticated, but small by comparison to China and the United States.
With the end of apartheid in the mid-1990s, there's no question about the protection of labor rights, because it's become a democracy. However, don't you think South Africa has too many trade unions competing for membership, and that threatens to undermine the competitive edge? For example, they try to recruit more members for their unions by increasing or promising to increase the salaries. And then that, of course, would undermine the competition or competitiveness of corporate governance. What do you think of this major concern?
Well, historically, apartheid was built on the back of black labor, as they say, in South Africa, which politicized the workers and the union movement, and they played a very important role, including the president himself, who was Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers. So they have played an important role in the liberation struggle in South Africa. But today there's certainly a problem of rising public sector wages in particular that has eaten away too much of the budget. And as I said earlier, the question is, are we getting sufficient output from the public health and education system in particular? And most of that is about public sector unionized workers. And certain of the state-owned enterprises have effectively employed many people in the Zuma administration era. There are too many people in the state that are underperforming. So Mr. Ramaphosa has to clean up the administration and get the public sector workers to be much more productive and, in turn, as you say, competitive. We can learn a lot from the China experience, and I think the Chinese president is very close to President Ramaphosa, and certainly with the BRICS and Belt and Road Initiative making lots of strides to pass on these lessons and to try and sharpen our economic policy.
Twice I have toured South Africa, and I was impressed by the growth of the middle class there. Don't you think domestic spending would constitute increasingly the bulk of the GDP in South Africa? And the next question, is, as a banker, what do you think of the monetary policy?
So the consumer and the financial services sectors are the largest sectors in the economy, the financial services, consumer-facing sectors. And this actually is something that's very constructive in the sense that, as you say, the rise of the black middle class on the back of affirmative action policy, greater employment in the public sector, has created a wind at the back in terms of spending. And also, at the level of the poor, the social welfare spending by the state, about 17 million people enjoy social cash flows on a monthly basis, which helps them acquire food and essentials for their lives. And this has fueled the economy, and businesses have done quite well. But we've stalled. That has stalled in the last year or two. We need to get that flywheel turning in order to get growth. On the central bank, the South African Reserve Bank has been seen amongst its international peers amongst the best-in-class central banks. And this is the independence of the central bank has been jealously guarded. Even if the state wants to buy out private ownership of the bank, essentially the fiscal and monetary policy of South Africa is firmly intact.
What do you make of the presence of the Chinese banking services and Huawei in this most developed economy in Africa?
Well, you know, I was personally very involved as the architect of the ICBC investment 10 years ago into Standard Bank, $5.5 billion. And you have many of their competitors, including Bank of China, China Development Bank, and others very active on the ground. So I think you can be satisfied that the Chinese government and the Chinese people and their institutions, including the financial institutions, are very much engaged. It's very good for Africa that we have both bottom-up democracy forming, and it's not perfect by any means. It's a mixed bag of different countries performing in a different way. But the Chinese are building infrastructure, engaged in financial services, including in providing telecommunications services to the countries. And the consumer demographic boom is an extremely strong factor for the next 20 years.
Mr. Coleman, agriculture, mining, and construction, they are the key economic sectors of the mineral-rich country, actually recorded a negative growth in the third and fourth quarters of 2018. Let's look at the issue of foreign direct investment. Law and order are said to be a serious chronic issue that deters foreign investors from coming to a place like Johannesburg, where you have a soaring unemployment rate and increasingly unsafe streets. The same might happen to Cape Town, although the remaining white minority may be the pillar force for shoring up the economic performance of South Africa. One way or another, security concerns about the investment environment might be a major purpose that either serve to, in the case of Cape Town, promote the economic growth, or in the case of Johannesburg, help undermine the dynamics of the economic growth. So what do you think of the security and safety concerns on the side of the investors, particularly Chinese investors who want to invest more in infrastructure and help with industrialization?
So let me assure your viewers that I think while security is always a concern, it may be an overblown factor. South Africa is very attractive for tourists, including Chinese tourists. Second assurance is that the President is very focused on removing obstacles to investment, including for tourist and business purposes, removing visa obstacles. There's been a very clear policy directive. It needs to be followed up in action by making visas much more easy to come by for foreigners, including the Chinese. But I think that you will see with the new administration a renewed sense of vigor about implementing reforms, about dealing with the land issue, about assuring people's safety, and about opening the doors for investment. Certainly from where I sit at Goldman Sachs, we see many large companies renewing the playbook and looking at, is South Africa a place as a platform for Africa, that they should be investing. And I think on the back of the elections, there are hopeful signs that if this administration puts in place a strong team, that we will see renewed economic reforms with a view to getting back in the short term, in the next couple of years, to 3% growth rates, and then hopefully to stronger 5% growth rates where we can deal with the unemployment problem.
Mr. Coleman, do you foresee a repeat of what happened in Zimbabwe in terms of land expropriation?
No, I don't. I think that Zimbabwe was a very specific case in point. I think that the President has been very clear, and I'm one of the business people in talking to him that has pointed out the need to give assurance about security of tenure, property rights, that property owned or bought is not like some other emerging markets where you wake up overnight and your property is gone. That it's very clear that you own what you bought, that you're legally protected, and South Africa's constitutional legal system will protect investors.
Thank you, Colin. You fell short of mentioning yet other attractions such as wines and whiskies in South Africa. Beautiful. I promise you.
Thank you for
See you next time. Goodbye.